Welcome back to Special Report. Joining me live in studio, former FBI Director James Comey. A little tougher to get across town without a motorcade.
Oh, tough for everybody today.
I understand you have a new book out.
I've heard that, yeah.
Thanks for being here. The book is Hire, Loyalty, Truth, Lies, and Leadership. Big sales in its first week. I've read the book. I've seen or read every interview that you've done on this media tour. A lot of people have focused on President Trump and your interactions. I want to get to that, but I want to start chronologically with the Hillary Clinton email probe and the decisions you made there. Is it true that you and your FBI colleagues made the decision to exonerate Secretary Clinton well before she was interviewed?
No.
So why wait till the end, and why write up the memo that you eventually bring forward first?
No, that's a good question. Come May, after we've been doing it for about 10 months, I started to, as part of my regular briefing from the investigators, see that their view was it was unlikely to end in a case that the prosecutors at DOJ would bring.
Before the interview?
Sure, yeah, because they'd spent 10 months digging around, reading all her emails, putting everything together, interviewing everybody who set up her system. They weren't certain of that result, but they said, look, boss, on the current course and speed, it looks like it's not going to get to a place where the prosecutors will bring it. So then in May, I started thinking, okay, if it continues that way, and it may not, but if it continues that way, so how do we end this thing in a credible way?
But what, if anything, could she have said in that interview that would have changed your mind and somehow changed what you eventually decided to do?
Well, two ways. First, by lying in a way that we could prove in the interview, or giving us a hook to continue the investigation to see if we could prove a lie, or admitting something that would surprise us about her intent. Now, a lot of folks have asked, good question, about why to do the interview at the end. That's fairly typical for a subject interview in a white-collar investigation. I think you see Special Counsel Mueller taking exactly that approach with the president.
But you already knew that she had been telling, whatever you want to say, lies, myths, truths about this investigation and how she handled those emails. Take a listen.
Secretary Clinton said there was nothing marked classified on her emails either sent or received. Was that true?
That's not true.
Secretary Clinton said, I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified material. Was that true?
There was classified material emailed.
Secretary Clinton said all work-related emails were returned to the State Department. Was that true?
No, we found work-related emails, thousands, that were not returned.
So it went on. I mean, there were clearly a pattern there, and you had already made your decision.
No, I had not made my decision, but I could see what the investigators saw after 10 months. If you don't have a general sense of where you're headed after 10 months of that kind of work, you're not competent. They could see it was unlikely, although not certain, unlikely to get us to a place where they would prosecute it at the Justice Department. And the question was, would she lie to us? What people say in the public forum, in a debate, or in a political campaign is not our business. Our business is, are you going to lie to us? And if you are, and we can prove it, then we're going to prosecute you.
You go back to intent a lot, but actually the statute, as it's written, handling classified information, grossly negligent doesn't deal with intent.
Well, grossly negligent is an expression of a kind of intent. How were you acting? What was your mental state at the time?
You were careful to call it extremely careless, not grossly negligent.
Right. I was struggling with the fact that we thought it was not mere sloppiness, but didn't rise to the level of criminal misconduct that the Justice Department would prosecute. So how do you describe that? I probably should have said really sloppy, but I wanted to be honest and say it's above sloppy. It doesn't add up to what the 1917 statute meant when it said grossly negligent is a felony.
So why did you allow Cheryl Mills, Secretary Clinton's chief of staff, to sit in on that interview? She was potentially a subject or a target in the investigation. She was a government employee. She wasn't Clinton's attorney, but yes, she sits in there and talks with her throughout the interview.
Yeah, my understanding was at that time she was one of Clinton's attorneys. She was no longer a subject in our investigation. The agents had scrubbed her conduct very carefully by that point, and she was no longer a subject. But that, again, that's a reasonable question. But the facts are, not a subject, one of Clinton's lawyers. She's entitled to be in an interview.
We asked people to tweet in or write in. We have one from J. Harper Wilson. I am a retired FBI agent serving almost 25 years, retiring in 1995 as a senior executive special agent. Please ask Thursday why a grand jury was not used in the Hillary Clinton investigation as would be normally, and why was it run out of HQ? Book did not address.
Yeah, the second one I'll take first. It was run out of HQ because it was a case of intense interest. outside to the media, and so to keep it tight, it was worked in the counterintelligence division at headquarters. You can reasonably disagree with that if you're an FBI person. Could have put it in Washington field office, could have put it in New York, but the decision that counterintelligence made was it'll be kept tighter and leak-proof, which it was, in the counterintelligence division.
And no grand jury?
I'm not allowed to comment on the way in which the grand jury was used. I can say this, though. She was not interviewed in front of a grand jury, which is another judgment call that prosecutors and investigators make all the time.
You thought Attorney General Loretta Lynch was compromised, that you had to do something different because of that tarmac meeting with former President Clinton and because she had wanted to call it a matter, correct?
Yeah, and other things.
And other things in this classified thing that ends up leaking to the New York Times. But she denies this. She writes, if he had any concerns regarding the email investigation, classified or not, he had ample opportunities to raise them with me, both privately and in meetings. He never did. So someone's not telling the truth here. Is it the former Attorney General or you?
No, actually, I think we're both telling the truth. I never went to her and said, Loretta, I think you should recuse yourself. My problem was she had already announced it publicly that she wouldn't and that she would accept my recommendation. And so at that point, what do I do? And I decided at that point, I got to step away from her.
All right, fast forward. A lot of people are upset about how it comes out, how you take control. It actually leads to Rod Rosenstein. He cites this in what you did as a reason for recommending your firing. You go on after that recommendation. You write a letter to Congress to announce the case is reopened because more classified emails have been found on Anthony Weiner's computer. You said it was last night a tough choice between concealing or coming forward, a really tough choice. But there are authorities in New York who are saying that FBI HQ was slow walking that case, and weeks went by without any action. Did you know that Andrew McCabe, your deputy, had sat on that revelation about the emails?
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that to be the case. I do know that New York and FBI headquarters became aware that there may be some connection between Weiner's laptop and the Clinton investigation weeks before it was brought to me for decision. And as I write in the book, I don't know whether they could have moved faster and why the delay.
So was it the threat that the New York agents were going to leak, that it existed, really what drove you to the not conceal part?
I don't think so. I think actually what drove it was the prosecutors in New York who were working the criminal case against Weiner called down to headquarters and said, are we getting a search warrant or not for this? That caused, Justice Department headquarters to then call across the street to the FBI and poke the organization, and they started to move much more quickly. I don't know why there was, if there was slow activity, why it was slow for those first couple of weeks.
I want to move on to the Trump investigation. We're told after this Australian diplomat reports his conversation with George Papadopoulos, talking about plans to get Russia info or emails about Hillary Clinton, that the FBI is notified through the State Department about this in early May. True?
No.
When were they notified?
First of all, I'm not confirming what the source was from it. The FBI learned the information about Papadopoulos in late July and opened a counterintelligence investigation at that point. The meeting that you're talking about occurred in the spring,
April,
before there were any public revelation of Russian hacked emails, but the FBI didn't learn about it until late July.
Okay, so what is the crime or the collusion that launches the investigation?
Yeah, collusion's not a word that I'm familiar with. I've seen
what
it
is
in
the
media
crime? What is the evidence, basically, that launches?
The question is, you open a counterintelligence investigation to understand, are any Americans in cahoots with the foreign intelligence activities of an adversary nation?
When the Steele dossier comes out, sometime early July, when did you personally learn about the memos in the dossier?
Sometime in the fall. I don't remember exactly when.
You're talking fall of...
Fall of 16.
Right. So who told you about them?
I don't remember. Someone on my senior staff.
Do you remember how they were described?
I remember they briefed me about it, explained that it came from a reliable source, former Allied intelligence officer. I remember being given a copy of it. I don't know whether it was September, October, sometime in that period of time.
When did you learn that the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign had funded Christopher Steele's work?
Yeah, I still don't know that for a fact.
What do you mean?
I've only seen it in the media. I never knew exactly which Democrats had funded. I knew it was funded first by Republicans, opposed to Donald.
But that's not true.
I'm sorry?
That's not true. That the dossier that Christopher Steele worked on was funded by Republicans?
Yeah, my understanding was his work started funded by Oppo Research, funded by Republicans.
So Free Beacon and said that they had Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS on a kind of a retainer, but they did not fund the Christopher Steele memo or the dossier. That was initiated by Democrats.
Okay, my understanding was the activity was begun, that Steele was hired to look into, was first funded by Republicans, then picked up, the important thing was picked up by Democrats opposed to Donald Trump.
So is that why, did you tell President Obama that the dossier was who it was funded by?
No, not to my recollection.
Did you want to know who it was funded by?
I wanted to know what I knew, which is that it was funded by people politically opposed to Donald Trump.
Okay.
Which particular opponents wasn't that important
But when
to me.
did you, so you still to this day don't know that it was funded by the DNC or
I've read
the
that in the
Clinton
media,
campaign?
but I don't know for a fact and didn't know while I was at the FBI which exact opponent of the president's funded that.
Okay. How many times did you, and to what extent did you brief President Obama on the dossier?
I didn't ever brief President Obama on the dossier. I was present during a conversation where Director of National Intelligence briefed it to him, as we did to the Gang of Eight and to the President-elect the first week of January.
You called the dossier unverified, salacious. Why did you use that to the FISA court to ask for surveillance for Carter Page? Not only use it, but you led with it. A bulk of that FISA application deals with that dossier. Why?
Yeah, that's not my recollection, Brett. And I don't know that the FISA application has been released. My recollection was it was part of a broader mosaic of facts that were laid before the FISA judge to obtain a FISA warrant.
There was a lot more than the dossier in the FISA application?
My recollection was there was a significant amount of additional material about Page and why there was probable cause to believe he was an agent of a foreign power. And the dossier was part of that, but was not all of it or a critical part of it, to my recollection.
This intel briefing at Trump Tower, you briefed the president-elect on kind of the sliver of the dossier, really the salacious part about the prostitutes in Moscow and that allegation.
Correct.
Didn't include anything broader than that, right?
Correct. My mission in that private briefing was just to tell him about that slice of it.
And who suggested you brief that?
I think the Director of National Intelligence did, and explained the logic of why it made sense for me to do it, which I agreed with.
So that briefing was just oral. It was just talking to the
Correct,
president.
just the two of us talking to each other.
CNN reported at the time that you handed a two-page executive summary of the dossier over to him.
I did not.
Did not. Speaking of CNN, you write in the memos of that meeting, you write, I said to President-elect Trump, media like CNN had the dossier and were looking for a news hook. I said it was inflammatory stuff. So the story of that briefing leaks out almost immediately after you do it. CNN and others run the story of this unverified dossier. Did you or your subordinates leak that?
No.
Did James Clapper?
No, not to my knowledge. No.
John Brennan?
I don't know who leaked it. I had no part in any leaking of it. It was about 4 or 5 days later that it leaked, but I remember because President-elect called me about it.
Did you ever try to find out?
Who leaked an unclassified public document? No.
Did you inform the President-elect at the time what you knew about how it was funded or who was behind it?
No, I did not.
Did you inform him that Christopher Steele had been fired by the FBI?
No.
Or that he had lied?
No, and I didn't know those things at that time anyway.
Or that it had been used, at least in part, to get this FISA application to spy on somebody in his campaign?
No, didn't come up.
Is it fair to say that President Obama and his...
Carter Page was in his campaign when the FISA order was obtained in October.
Tied to it tangentially?
At one point.
Okay. Is
Correct.
it fair to say that President Obama and his inner circle knew a lot more about the dossier and the scope of the investigation than President-elect Trump and his team?
No, I don't think that's fair at all.
You think that they were equal on as far as the briefing?
As far as I know, they knew the same set of facts, as did the leaders of Congress.
There was no difference between what the FBI told the FISA court and what about the Trump-Russia investigation and what you told the new President of the United States?
What the FBI and the FISA application said in October of 2016, I don't remember clearly enough all that's in the FISA application, but we sure didn't lay that out for anybody, President Obama, President-elect Trump, or the leaders of Congress.
Okay. A lot of questions about the interactions with President Trump, and your memo is memorializing that. After you're fired on Capitol Hill, we learned this. Take a listen. No, this is 17.
I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel. And so I asked a close friend of mine to do it.
Who was that?
A good friend of mine who's a professor at Columbia Law School.
So what specifically did you leak to Mr. Richmond?
I sent Mr. Richmond a copy of a 2-page unclassified memo and asked him to get the substance of it out to the media.
You call him a good friend and a professor, but you didn't reveal that you had hired him as a special government employee for the FBI. to work on special projects. Why?
Because it wasn't relevant. He was an FBI special government employee until February of 2017.
Did you have other special advisors like that?
Nope.
So what exactly was his job?
Two things. His primary focus was on our Going Dark challenge, helping us think through and articulate and fight for access to encrypted communications. And then law enforcement data was a big part of his responsibility.
So did you leak other things through Mr. Richmond?
Yeah. I'm smiling, Brett. I don't consider what I did with Mr. Richmond a leak. I told him about an unclassified conversation with the president.
Okay, but the FBI protocol, you went through this with Anderson last time.
I gave him nothing else ever to share with the media.
FBI protocol says your own employment agreement with the FBI prohibits, quote, the unauthorized disclosure of any information or material from or related to FBI files or any information acquired by virtue of my official employment without prior written permission from the FBI. Did you have written permission?
No, and I didn't consider it part of an FBI file, all the things that I talked about with Anderson.
You wrote it as an FBI director. It was a work product.
No, it was not. It was my personal aid to memoir.
You're talking to the president?
Sure. I created 2 copies of it, one to keep in my personal safe at home, and I left another one with the FBI so the Bureau could always have access to it. But I always thought of it as mine, like a diary.
Who else did you give, leak, or whatever you want to call it, the memos to?
Give is what I prefer.
Yeah, the memos to.
I gave the memos to my legal team after I gave them to Dan Richmond, after I asked him to get it out to the media.
And
gave 4 memos to my legal team.
Which included Patrick Fitzgerald?
Patrick Fitzgerald.
He was a legal team at that time?
Correct, sure.
And
David Kelly. And Dan Richmond.
Okay. You said in the memos, I said, I don't do sneaky things, I don't leak, I don't do weasel moves. But, I mean, we can argue what a leak is, but that's a leak, isn't it?
It's not.
Okay. Here's what you told Chuck Grassley about leaking.
Director Comey, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?
Never.
Has any classified information relating to President Trump or his associates been declassified and shared with the media?
Not to my knowledge.
So at what point were you made aware that some of the information was classified by the FBI?
Which information?
In the memos.
Oh, yeah, I don't know, sometime after I was fired, the FBI apparently made a decision that there were some words in at least 2 of the memos, maybe 1, I think 2, that were diplomatically sensitive. And so my lawyers returned them to the FBI. But that testimony was truthful, and I stand by it. I was hoping you were going to ask me that.
I was.
It's truthful.
I want to play what the president said today about you on this channel.
Look, Comey is a leaker, and he's a liar. And not only on this stuff. He's been leaking for years. He's probably been using his friend, the so-called professor, who now turns out to have FBI clearance, which he never said. He even lied about that because he never said that in Congress. He said he gave it to a friend. And he gave it to a friend to leak classified information. It's all classified. It was totally classified. So he did an illegal act. And he said it himself, in order to get a special counsel against me.
Reaction to that?
He's just wrong. Facts really do matter, which is why I'm on the show to answer your questions. That memo was unclassified then. It's still unclassified. It's in my book. The FBI cleared that book before it could be published. That's a false statement.
What about not telling Congress that he was an agent for you or worked at the FBI or somehow was some employee that you had 35,000 FBI employees?
But none of that was true. I described him, I hope in a good way, as a good friend to expose there might be a bias in my connection to the guy. He had left his FBI job months earlier, and so there's lots of other connections. I know him because we were prosecutors together. I didn't mention that. I taught with him at Columbia. I didn't mention that. I think I offered the Congress a fair picture of my connection to the guy.